Well, good morning and welcome to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. I'm not quite sure what happened to my startup video there, but never mind. Anyway, Elevenses it is. It's show number 599 and it's the 12th of April. Today's show, got a fairly packed show for you again today. Some masked bikers have attacked a cyclist with knives. UK fuel stocks apparently have fallen to their lowest level since the Ukraine conflict started. First quarter registration, the motorcycles are up 25%. Where did I get that from? Up, they're up anyway on 2025. UK World News in brief. We'll look at Jeff Smith as well, who sadly has died, the former motocrosser, or scrambler, I should say. UK's Kawasaki importer, they're reducing their finance rate to 0% on some mid-range Kawasaki's. CFMoto, they are offering a 7.9% rate of finance over their entire range. We'll have a quick look at Oxford's underseat first aid kit, reasonably priced. A combined pump and jump starter from Noko, which is a little bit more expensive. Then there's a dubiously useful portable fridge, which links to a water-cooled jacket. And then spy shots have appeared for the Triumph Bonneville 400 in India. And finally, we'll look at the sporty Bajaj Pulsar NS 400, which uses the last generation KTM 370 engine. And then finally, in today's in-depth item, we'll have a look at a debate which is raging across the motorcycle community, and particularly on one of my Facebook posts. Front brake first or rear brake first? What's the physics involved? What works best and what do I recommend? I'll cover that at the end of the show, so stay with me all the way through to the closing minutes and I'll look at that. Right, okay, so what's been going on in the last few days? Well, there've been a bunch of different initiatives aimed at lobbying for the future of motorcycling. And now on Thursday, I dealt with MAG's rather weird universal driving license scheme, which they have proposed as an alternative to everything to do with driving vehicles at the moment. And I'll just send you the link actually to that because it is quite I think it's quite important post, and if I can get the link up, I will. I'm not going to go over the factual errors in their Facebook post here. You can read those in the link, which I've just about got ready to go up online. There we go. So that's MAG. Now, meanwhile, the National Motorcycle Council, which you may recall MAG actually pulled out of, they've welcomed the publication of the government's transport strategy, Better Connected, a strategy for integrated transport. And this is the front cover for that. And as you can see, there is actually a motorcycle on it, sort of up here in the top corner. It's a bit hard to see, but it is there. Now, the strategy says there is a need to consider transport through a new lens rather than a traditional approach to transport, which thinks in terms of buses, cars, or trains. We must instead prioritize how people experience the transport network as a whole. Now, I'm absolutely certain we've heard that proposal before, but maybe not necessary in a strategy document. Anyway, NMC says that's a positive ambition, provided it is inclusive of motorcycles. And they point out that whilst motorcycling does receive some positive, like brief mentions, they flag up that in certain parts of the document, they are not offered as an alternative to transport by car. And they also point out that the engagement by bikers at regional roadshows, which were part of the original consultation process, and apparently gave the document a lot of feedback, it doesn't actually get into the document. Anyway, the strategy says that motorcycle access to bus lanes is a congestion management tool, though they still leave the final decision to local authorities. And they also say that in urban areas, motorcycles have a role to play in first and last mile connectivity. I'm not quite sure how that works because, are you going to catch a train to somewhere where you've left your motorcycle to do the last mile to go to work, or what? I don't know. They also point out that motorcycles are valuable where rural public transport is limited. And there is also recognition about the risks from poor road surfaces, so that's all good news. Now, over in Europe, FIM Europe, that's the federation which covers motorsport, incidentally, and the NMC, they've unveiled a new set of joint position papers, and that is an attempt to make sure that motorcycling is being taken seriously in the EU legislative process. Why worry about that when we're not in the EU? Because the EU decisions still affect us. Back in Blighty, the National Motorcyclist Council, once again, and the Vintage Motorcycle Club here, they have published a keynote policy paper on the legacy and historic motorcycle sector, calling for better recognition, because they say there were 625,000 roughly vintage and classic motorcycles in existence in 2023, though around 400,000 are thought to be older than 25 years. Quite how many of those are in use on the road isn't clear. And Motorcycle Industry Association, that's the mouthpiece for the manufacturers basically, they warn that the UK's electric motorcycle sector is on a cliff edge because there is no new motorcycle grant for electric motorcycles. It expired this month, and they flag up that this will cause market disruption at a time when the government is encouraging uptake of zero emission vehicles. And just a quick mention, I've kicking off a new Fresh Start series. It'll go out under the regular Tips on Tuesday series. And the aim is to take a fresh look at biking's basic core skills. Now, it's easy to assume that, basic training is job done. You've got your driving license for your bike. And some people think that makes riders instantly ready to launch into the advanced stuff. But before that conversation, I wish to step back and ensure we have the fundamentals clear. That is useful for both new riders and experienced riders, and because core skills are what everything else rests on basically. So the new series will rebuild these core skills from the ground up in a very fresh way, actually, not because the old material was wrong, but 30 years of coaching has shown me that riders benefit from a clear and structured approach to the basics just as much as they need the actual accurate information. All right, okay, on to the weather today. Well, we're in a fairly standard classic spring pattern here. The jet stream is sitting to the northwest of the UK. That's trying to steer depressions into the north and west of the UK. Whereas in the south there is some high pressure which is holding on at the moment, and so they're in a battle. We're in that sort of typical battleground between settled and unsettled air, and the result is a fairly typical sort of northwest southeast split. So the more unsettled and breezy weather with temperatures which are average or even slightly below average, with bands of rain and showers, that will affect the north of the UK. Southern England and the southwest too will see longer, drier and brighter spells, especially early in the next week, with temperatures around average or even slightly above average, at least for the first part of the week. And of course, if you're in the middle, when you see the mixed bag, which is sometimes the sort of sun and sometimes the rainy bits. So it really is a case of check your own weather forecast to find out exactly what's going on for the next week. All right, okay, on with the first news story then. Well, police are appealing for witnesses and CCTV footage after two motorcyclists wearing dark clothing and balaclavas threatened a cyclist in Swindon. The incident happened in broad daylight, between 3:30 and 4:30 p.m. On Sunday, March 15th. And the pair, who were on scrambler-style motorcycles, followed the cyclist before throwing mud at him. And when he turned around to confront them, they pulled knives on him. Now, with the ceasefire in the Gulf remaining on a knife edge, at least it was when I checked this morning, fuel stocks at petrol stations throughout the UK are reported to have hit their lowest levels since the crisis triggered by the Russia Ukraine conflict. The data, which comes from the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, confirms that forecourt stocks of petrol and diesel reached a 3-year low at the end of March, tanks averaging just 40% of their capacity across the country. Some areas were lower than that. Now, the last time it reached this level was back in December 2022. Now, experts have attributed these declining stocks to a surge in demand, but I always find this a very unlikely explanation. After all, you can only rush out to fill your tank to the brim once. After that, you're simply refueling as you ride or drive, so the demand falls back to what is usual. So I just don't get that as an explanation. Anyway, New Delhi have released a new draft policy which proposes to ban two-wheelers and three-wheelers that run on fossil fuels. And this is an attempt to manage emissions in one of the most polluted cities in the world. I suspect it's also to try to reduce that country's reliance on imported oil. Now, vehicular emissions are the largest single contributor to air pollution in the city. Two-wheelers make up around 2/3 of all the vehicles, and the draft proposal would allow only electric three-wheelers to be registered from 2027. So those are sort of the auto rickshaw things that people travel around in, and only electric two-wheelers from 2028. But at the same time, Hanoi is actually rolling back its blanket ban plan. Now, if you remember, the proposal that came out quite recently, last year, that was that fossil fueled motorcycles would be prohibited completely within the Ring Road 1 area. And this policy was due to start in July, which is not very long away at all. Now, instead, what's going to happen is that the city will roll out the measures step by step. So they talk about a roadmap of limiting restrictions to specific hours, specific areas, and specific vehicle groups, said to be tailored to real world conditions, whatever that means. Okay, how's the motorcycle market doing in the UK? Well, the March figures are out, so we have the first quarter results now, and the MCIA says that it's showing a strong recovery following the challenging year of 2025. Petrol bike sales were up 16.1%, but unfortunately sales of electric motorcycles dropped 23%. Just 267 of those shifted, compared with 349 in March 2025. Now, it's claimed rising fuel prices are causing riders to switch to more affordable economic petrol-powered options. I find that hard to believe, frankly, because the time frame is so short. The Gulf conflict has been going on for 6 weeks or so, but you can't walk into the average dealers these days and buy a motorcycle off the shelf, as it were. Many are to order. Anyway, the big adventure bikes seem to be the growth area, up 27% over the first quarter of 2026. Modern classics, they've been propping up sales for the last year or two. They were down very slightly on the same period last year, but in the wider perspective, things still aren't great. The numbers are maybe up on 2025, but they are still down on 2024. The general trend is still downward. So the recovery is relative, and it may well be behind the price cuts that I mentioned recently. Last week it was Suzuki, and we'll see some new deals on in just a moment. Right, quick break while I hopefully get the video up. As always, can I ask you to take a moment to like and subscribe to this show if you've not already done so? Every click helps other motorcyclists discover my content, or simply share the word the old-fashioned way by telling your riding buddies about Elevenses. They can watch on catch-up. Remember, my latest riding skills articles are always free, and you can get all the links delivered weekly to your email inbox by subscribing to my newsletter at survivalskills.substack.com. Or you can use this QR code to jump straight to it, when the show's over, of course. No spam, and if you don't like the content, unsubscribe at any time. Right, okay, so News again. What else is there? This is from around the world. Now, only last week I reported that the Foreign Office had updated guidance for bike hire in Thailand and mentioned the need to check licenses and insurance before hiring bikes. But sadly, not everybody takes any notice. And this time it's a man from Soham who's ended up in hospital just hours after flying in, apparently, and hiring a 250cc motorcycle. He was hit by another vehicle, but has discovered his travel insurance did not cover him for motorcycles over 125 cc's. Now, he suffered fractures and a brain injury, and it's estimated it will cost at least £100,000 to airlift him home. So, predictably, a GoFundMe page has been set up to cover the costs. And in Vietnam, sadly, a 19-year-old British woman has died following a crash involving the motorcycle she was riding pillion on, Orla Waits. She died in Hanoi's Viet Duc Friendship Hospital on April the 2nd. She was said to have been thrown off the machine and hit by an oncoming truck. The incident occurred on the Ha Giang Loop, which is in the country's north. It's a road trip around 350 kilometers that winds through the Vietnamese mountains along the border with China. It's reputed to be a very tough ride indeed, and generally takes several days to complete. And it is popular with tourists who can ride pillion in groups organized by tour operators. Now, one of the countries worst hit by the Middle East crisis is Pakistan, where fuel prices have soared. Around 40% of Pakistan's petrol is used to fuel around 30 million two-wheelers and three-wheeled auto rickshaws. But last week's price hike, 18%, where the government raised the price of fuel to try to preserve their stocks. It now means a typical household is spending, wait for this, if you think petrol is expensive in the UK, 31% of their daily income to buy just 1 litre of petrol. Industry analysts expect the crisis to supercharge a surge in the move to electric motorcycles, particularly given the availability of cheap and plentiful solar power in the country. And it would slash emissions too in what was the world's most polluted country in 2025. Indonesia is preparing to shift its motorcycle market towards electrification, with regulations expected to prioritize electric bikes for domestic use, but they will direct petrol-powered models towards export. You may remember, of course, that some Triumphs are built in Indonesia. So their industry minister, Agus Gumiwang Kartasasmita, he said manufacturers will be required to build sufficient EV production capacity as part of the roadmap, which ultimately aims for all motorcycles used in Indonesia to be electric. Conventional bikes will be channeled to overseas market, particularly Africa, the Middle East, and South America. Now, Palm Beach, a county sheriff's deputy was caught on a cell phone firing a taser at a man on a motorbike seconds before he collided with an SUV. The rider was identified as 27-year-old Stanley Jacks, and he remains in a critical condition with severe head injuries. Now, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office say the deputies first spotted Jacks riding recklessly and tried to stop him, but he rode off. And then when they tried to stop him again a bit later, the taser was fired. The sheriff's office said that the taser never made contact with Jacks, and no deputies have been placed on leave following the accident. Now, in Sydney, I think this was, a man was arrested after an incident that saw his car surrounded and damaged by a group of bikers. The police investigation that followed revealed that the car had struck a group of stationary motorcyclists 15 minutes earlier and then made off. It crashed into a fire hydrant and was eventually pursued as far as a nearby service station. The police arrested the 49-year-old man who's been charged with, get this, predatory driving. What an amazing title for that particular offence, and not giving his particulars to the owner of damaged property. Now, I'm showing my age here, but I was sad to see that Jeff Smith, one of Britain's arguably greatest competitive motorcyclists, has died aged 91. He was born in Corn in Lancashire, not Lincolnshire, Lancashire, on October the 14th, 1934. He began riding at the age of 9 when his father gave him a Triumph, a two-stroke, to ride in the field behind their home. Now, after the war, he competed in local trials events, and by the time he was 17, he was a Norton Works rider, winning the British Trials Championship in 1953 for Norton, and again in 1954 when he switched to BSA. Now, in that same year, he was a stand-in for BSA at the 1954 Dutch 500cc motocross Grand Prix at Assen, and he promptly won the event. He finished the season in 3rd place. Now, by 1960, he'd already won the 500cc British Motocross Championship 3 times, and he added a 4th, the first of a string of what were to be 6 more or 6 consecutive titles. Scrambling, as it was known then, got mainstream coverage on TV, so he was a well-known name, even to non-motorcycle enthusiasts, though his face was usually covered in mud, of course. In '64, he won the first of his 2 world titles. He was appointed an MBE in the 1970 New Year's Honours List, and when BSA pulled out of motocross in 1972, Smith retired with a total of 30 Grand Prix wins and 2 World Championships behind him. And he went on to work with the Bombardier Corporation in Canada, developing their off-road motorcycles, and he later joined Armstrong CCM Motorcycles and worked with them too. Right, okay, just a quick break again while I get my breath back. If you enjoy these shows, why not become a member of my Ko-fi pages? Just follow the QR code and sign up. As a member, you get free access to the latest articles and the Survival Schools ebook shop with instant downloads of everything from free mini ebooks to ebook versions of my paperbacks. Become a one-off supporter and you'll open up the archive of over 1,000 articles. If you buy me a monthly cuppa as a subscriber, there's even more content to enjoy. Right, okay, back to the bike news. Now, I was just going to run through the list of supporters from last week. Or, now I've lost it. Where has it gone? There it is. Living Martial Arts, Johan, John Wombat, Mad Cockney, Howard, and Anonymous. So thank you all very much indeed for your support. Right, so what's going on with motorcycles? Well, the first story is that Kawasaki are pushing their mid-range bikes, Z650 RS, Z650, the Vulcan S and the Z500 and the Eliminator. They've got a 0% finance offer under the K options label. There are 2 options, minimum deposit deal or a half up front, nothing for 2 years, and pay the rest or return the bike. And in a separate offer, Kawasaki is also giving away free touring kit for the 2025 Versys models, the 650 and the 1100. CFMoto, they've gone a step further. They have a finance deal across their entire range. Now, this is in partnership with Santander Consumer Finance. The rate is set at 7.9 APR and includes the 675 NK. That will be just £49 per month. You do have to put down a £1,344 deposit and then pay £3,012 at the end. The MTX 800, that comes in at £69 a month, and the S75 SRR, that's the sports bike, £89. The A2 friendly 450 MT is £69 a month, obviously with those added payments at either end. Now, the deal's available till September this year, and there'll be the usual end of turn options: pay the final installment, trade in, or return the bike. And all machines are backed by a 4-year warranty. Now, many of the Biker Down courses, the organisers give away a free first aid kit, and they're always been designed to pop under the seat, or at least in a top box or a tank bag. I've never been able to get one under my seat, but Oxford are joining the party with this waterproof first aid kit. It's also said to be compact enough, but I struggle to get a 12 centimetre and 20 centimetre pouch under my seats anyway. The kit includes the sort of usual adhesive plasters, bandages, first aid blankets, sterile burn compress and scissors, disposable gloves and wet wipes, and usefully a first aid manual. It's a reasonable $19.99 recommended retail price. Here's a gadget that serves two needs at once. It's the Noko AX65. It's said to be the ultimate all-in-one portable jump starter, tire inflator, and flashlight emergency roadside companion. So it's said to be able to start a 6-litre diesel, so it should cope with a motorcycle. Comes with polarity protection, which is a good thing because I managed to blow a jump starter up when I misconnected in pitch black across the battery terminals. The 100 psi pump can inflate the tire to 40 psi and auto shut off in under 2 minutes. Now, the built-in flashlight has emergency modes, but of course, how you're going to point it at what you're trying to connect the unit to in the dark at the same time, I'm never quite sure. The bad news is a fairly eye-watering £299. I did find it online for about £50 less. That's a lot more than the basic electric pump and separate jump starter. But I guess if you're strapped for space, the single unit might make some sense. Now, Kawasaki has updated its hybrid bikes. Oops, that's the wrong picture. Let's come back to that one. There it is. With a revised feature which allows riders to manually change from the ICE engine to full EV mode at speeds of up to 60 kilometers per hour. That's 37 miles per hour. Now, I'd commented previously on the fact that it could only be made at around 15 miles per hour previously, 25 kilometers per hour, which although it legally allowed bikes to enter zero emission zones, obviously a little bit on the slow side. So Kawasaki said that this is a move to in response to consumer feedback. Now, another update is to the sport mode. Now, this could previously only be accessed when in manual transmission mode, where you're using the flippers, the paddles on the left switch cluster to change gear. But the new system allows you to access sport mode when it's in fully automatic transmission mode. So these bikes are already apparently with selected dealers in the UK. Now, I was just going to show you the, that was the one. There we go. Now, rather more dubious use, unless you have are expecting another record-breaking summer of heat here in the UK, and there are some signs that we could have another hot one. It's this portable thermoelectric cooler, which you can see down there on the back corner of the bike. What's it for? Well, it's a chiller using the same technology that you find in the sort of portable refrigerators, the kind of thing that I have stuck in the back of the car. So what's it for? Well, oops, I've just gone full screen, which is not what I meant to do. Damn, I've just lost my picture completely. Hang on a minute. Come back to that picture and do apologize. This is why I need an editor to do this for me. Right, that's what I was trying to show you. There we go. It's a water-cooled jacket. As you can see, there's a pipe that runs from the chiltier, which runs up into the jacket and keeps you cool. The obvious problem is, of course, you have to be permanently connected to the cooling unit for that to work well. Right. Anyway, next story. This one involves Triumph and Spy Shots, and this is the Triumph Bonneville 500. Now, we've known this is coming for quite a while. Let me give you a zoom in view on the machine. You can see Moto Bob has plastered their name across the pic. It reveals that the design is classic, so it's obviously targeted in the general direction of the Royal Enfield Classic 350. You get wire spoke wheels. There are gaiters on the conventional forks. There are twin shocks, which reduce the single monoshock seen on the Speed 400. Rider and passenger are hopefully made comfortable by that sort of long single seat. There's a teardrop tank, and there is a fully circular display. Now, the Bonneville 400 is expected, at least in India, to feature Triumph's new 350cc engine. It's not clear whether a 400 version will appear in the UK, but my guess is it probably will. Now, interestingly, Moto Bob broke these photos, as I said, but they come from a variety of angles against a variety of backgrounds, which very much suggest that this wasn't some random person standing at the side of the road with a camera when he thought, oh, that's the new Bonneville flying past him. It looks very much like it's a sort of controlled leak, as it were. Talking of Triumphs, which I was very briefly, there's a bit more detail on the India spec Triumph 400 series with the 349cc single cylinder. Apparently, it is not simply a downsized version of the 398 with the stroke reduced, as I suspected. There are apparently a host of other changes to the engine internals, including a redesigned crankshaft to deliver higher inertia at the low end. That's presumably heavier then. Tweaks to the valve timing, which is something I also suggested was more than likely, and it also comes apparently with more aggressive fueling. Although what that means, I have no idea. And that's before the engine comes in 3 different states of tune, depending on which model of 400 Triumph you're actually about to order. Right, okay, so let's have a look at this bike. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned that Bajaj are taking the KTM 390 down to a 350 to take advantage of this lower taxation rate in India. But I also mentioned that the Indian manufacturer had taken hold of the previous generation, the 370 KTM engine, and they're going to use it in their own Pulsar NS 400, and that is this particular bike. Now, the machine's just been launched as one of a 3-bike range in Spain. It's a 39 horsepower 273 single. It gets a quick shifter, a slipper clutch, riding modes, and a claimed wet weight of 174 kilograms. The bike will appear also in India, at least, at the absolute rock bottom price of around £3,100. Now, bizarrely, the new Bajaj now undercuts the learner legal KTM Duke, which is actually about 1,500 more expensive. And that, of course, is also made by Bajaj. Because they control KTM, and it's also considerably cheaper than Honda's CB125R, and obviously allows you to something like 3 times the 125 learner limit for this 370. Now, will Bajaj continue their expansion into the UK? No word yet, but since the market is shifting away from the premium end, you'll recall that Suzuki permanently reduced prices on 3 models last week. Bajaj's bargain price bike looks set to compete head-on with Kawasaki, Enfield's 350 and BSA's Bantam 2. Also bikes built in India, of course. Right. Okay, so on to the in-depth item today. Now, the question here is an interesting one. Front brake first or rear brake first? That's a question which is being hotly debated on my Facebook page. So I thought I would actually take a look at the physics involved and try to actually find out from hard science what works best. Now, as I mentioned, I'm launching a new Fresh Start series as part of my long-running Tips on Tuesday series, and I am starting with braking. And I put up a series of sort of teaser posts, trying something a little bit different. And on Thursday, I titled the post the myth the front brake is dangerous. Now, this generated a question from one of my readers. He asked, with modern 125s and the like coming out of the factory with link brakes, is it better to apply a bit of both at the same time from the off, or is there a good reason not to if you have the option, as you do on bigger bikes with independent systems? Now, it is a good question, and it gets to the heart of modern linked brake systems. Which is all well and good, but it generated an instant answer before I could get there myself. So this is what somebody answering this question on my post said. Rear a split second before applying the front. Balances weight distribution by applying the rear. First, you load the rear shock and shift the weight rearwards. I'll come back to that. When you apply the front, the fork and tyre loads smoothly as the weight transitions forward in a balanced manner rather than abruptly. There are situations where you may want to load the front heavily, but generally speaking, rear first. And other comments supported that, one citing reputable training organisations, but without actually going as far as naming them, whilst at the same time suggesting I was sort of some random social media poster. So much for my dozen years of building my profile on Facebook, obviously. Anyway, another point was that by letting off the rear as the front takes over, it helps keep the bike level, which I don't dispute it does. And it's actually something I've been suggesting to riders on my training courses, particularly when touring, particularly when carrying a passenger, because it makes things a lot more comfortable on the back seat. But several people just suggested it allowed for more effective braking, but without any evidence to back this up. Now, as it happens, I've been quite aware of this sort of reversed braking order theory for quite a few years, and it seems to have risen from a single study carried out 20 odd years ago in Montreal in Canada by the Promocycle Foundation at the request of the Fédération Motocycliste de Québec. Now, unfortunately, I cannot find the original study anymore, although there is a summary, but it doesn't actually give you the raw data that the old one did. Anyway, what they did was they took two bikes, a sports bike and a cruiser, loaded them up with monitor equipment to measure brake application, brake force, and speed and deceleration rates. And then they got a bunch of volunteers to ride the two machines, and they tested out how they went under braking using the conventional front first, rear second method and the rear first, front second method that they wanted to investigate. Now, they got the riders to brake as hard as possible. They got up to about 0.8, 0.9 G, which is respectable, but not quite as hard as you can go. Now, they found that with practice, the rear first method did produce slightly superior stopping distances, but it wasn't a great deal. And the important bit is this: initially at first, the results demonstrated wide variability in stopping distance, with many stops actually taking longer using the rear first method than the front first method. The front first method actually delivered a fairly tight cluster of results, indicating that the riders could pull up pretty consistently using the traditional method. So why was there a lack of consistency, at least initially, with the rear first method? Well, the most obvious one is that as the front brake is fed in, the rider has to back off the rear brake at the same time. Now, I can't find any studies that go into any sort of depth on this, but it does seem that this kind of antagonistic use of two different muscle groups actually produces some difficulties in being consistent. So it's difficult to squeeze with the hand whilst relaxing the pressure on the brake with the foot. And it's compounded by the fact that we do actually have far finer motor control over our fingers and hands than we do over the foot and the ankle. So in other words, the rear first method introduces a control coordination problem. Now, I dare say that someone like a racer who brakes hard corner after corner, lap after lap, and day after day can build up the necessary consistency, which is perhaps why at least one track-based school in the UK promotes the rear first method. But the average road rider, most don't practice hard braking very often, and some don't practice it ever. So the other problem is that the situation that none of us can actually practice for is a real life emergency. So it's very different from going up and down the test braking area, trying over and over and over until you get good at something, to experience a one-off threat when they absolutely have to pull the best braking out of the hat. emergency braking is where we need to be effective and consistent. We simply don't have the opportunity to say, well, I'll go round and I'll try again and I'll get it better next time round. We can do that off-road. We can't do it on-road in an emergency. We've got one shot and we need to get that one shot right. So as for the physics, the idea that using the rear brake first loads the rear, I mean, it's quite simply wrong. Weight transfer under braking is governed by deceleration. It's not governed by your brake choice. So what happens is that the weight transfer occurs because the motorcycle center of mass is located above the ground. In the diagram, it's sort of somewhere just at the back of the petrol tank. And when we slow down, inertia wants to keep that mass moving forwards. And because it's higher than the ground, what happens is there is a rotational force, a moment, if you like. And that pivots the bike around whichever brake is doing the deceleration. So if we're using the front brake, it tends to pivot the bike around the front wheel's axle and contact patch, which is why, of course, bike's stoppy. If you use the rear brake, it is still rotating around the rear wheel. So it's still pushing the front of the bike down. It's not loading the rear. And in fact, of course, if you brake hard enough with the rear, you'll soon lose contact. There's no magic reverse weight transfer when you swap brakes. Now, when you do apply the rear brake first, there is a very short period in which there is more weight on the rear tire and it has slightly more grip. But as soon as the rate of deceleration increases, the loading moves to the front. You'll remember the braking capability of the rear wheel collapses. And you'll know, if you've tried it, that you can lock the rear very easily on a motorcycle by using the rear brake only. So what happens? Well, using rear brake usually causes the rear suspension to squat or compress slightly, and that's not to do with the weight moving to the rear. It's because the braking force is being applied below the swing arm pivot, and that pulls the rear of the chassis downwards. Now that makes the bike feel flatter, it makes it feel more stable because there's reduced fork dive, but it does not change where the weight is going. That's still going forwards towards the front tire as the bike slows down. So the real advantage of a light touch on the rear brake just before the front is chassis management, really, not weight distribution. It presets the suspension, if you like. It slows down the rate of forward pitch, and that prevents the front forks from sort of slamming right through their travel abruptly. And that does help keep the front tire from being overwhelmed if you snatch at the front brake. But the same effect generally can be obtained by applying the front brake more progressively. So what about link brakes, which was the original question? Well, I believe that most bikes will apportion, they will apply both brakes at the same instant, whether you apply the front brake or the rear brake. I don't think that there is any timing factor involved, but what does change is the brake pressure, which is apportioned from front to back. If you apply the front brake lever only on a linked brake bike, there's generally more pressure going to the front. If you apply the rear brake, there's a little bit more rearward bias. But basically, it's a case of read your own manual and find out what your own bike does. Anyway, my advice for all riders, stick with what you know, front first, rear second, for the very straightforward reason, excuse me, is how you were taught. And what we were taught first always sticks hardest. As I constantly point out on my training courses, it's much harder to unlearn a habit than it is to get into it in the first place, which is why I recommend that people take post-test training soon rather than later. Now, so what I'd say is work to develop the ability to brake progressively, work to brake firmly up towards the limit of tire grip. That's easy if you've got ABS, of course. Not quite so easy if you've got to deal with a potential lockup, and that, of course, is still possible on a CBS-equipped machine. So it's important to be able to feel the limit of traction when you've got no ABS, and I think this is where keeping things simple and avoiding these sort of complex techniques that may marginally benefit expert riders in test conditions, but they're likely to collapse in real life emergencies. So the biggest sort of problem in braking is actually not technique. People I've seen online talking about how you can shave off fractions of sort of meters with better braking technique, but that is fiddling around at the edge. The big change that you can make to your braking technique is not to be caught by surprise, which allows you to get on the brakes as soon as you detect an emergency. It's what aviation talks about as the startle effect, which paralyzes decision making and means that we don't do what we know we should do for several sort of even seconds in times. Anyway, I'll be following that up next week. Right, okay, that is pretty much it for today's show. If you've got any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. I know that my analysis of the front or rear first braking technique is going to be criticized. Somebody's going to find fault with it. All I can say to that is I've done as much inquiry into this as I possibly can, and I'm pretty convinced that my analysis of the situation is correct. If somebody just tells you that it's better, ask them where they got their facts from and where they checked. Right, okay, so again, thank you very much indeed for looking in. This has been Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams, and I will be back next time at 11 o'clock next Sunday with another show, and it will be show number 600 as well, which will be fun. Right, thank you once more if you're watching live, and if you're catching up later, again, it'll be great for you to look in.